Sarah woke up every day before the sun rose. The house was simple, but every corner was filled with the warmth of someone who had lived a lot and learned that the true value of life was not in riches, but in the love that was shared. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the smell of warm bread, and in the living room, toys were scattered on the floor, waiting for the little hands that would soon arrive. Lucas, her 8-year-old grandson, helped her arrange the chairs around the table, eager for the arrival of the children. "Grandma, can we make that chocolate cake today?" he asked with a sparkle in his eyes as he finished setting the plates. Sarah smiled, caressing her grandson's hair affectionately. "Of course, my love, but only if you promise to help me wash the dishes afterwards." He made an exaggerated gesture of thinking, then laughed. "Deal." Sarah's routine was guided by love and dedication to the little ones who, without her, would have nowhere to go while their parents worked. She didn't charge anything, only asking that, whenever possible, each family bring something to help. A kilo of flour, a bag of rice, milk. Small gestures that kept that home running. The first group of children arrived excitedly, running up to Sarah and hugging her. "Grandma Sarah, can we play in the yard today?" The elderly woman laughed, straightening her apron. "You can, but first let's have breakfast because no one plays on an empty stomach." Lucas helped the younger ones sit down, serving milk and buttered toast. He liked this life alongside his grandmother, feeling important for contributing. He understood that without Sarah, those children would be alone, and she, despite her age, never complained. "Grandma Sarah, don't you ever get tired?" he asked, watching her as she dried a cup. She smiled, sitting down next to him. "When we do something with love, Lucas, the fatigue becomes just a detail." The days followed a harmonious rhythm. The yard filled with laughter as the children ran barefoot through the grass, inventing games and sharing toys. Sarah watched it all with attentive eyes, making sure no one got hurt. Lucas was her right-hand man, organizing the younger ones and creating games to keep everyone entertained. When a child cried from a fall, Sarah would soon come with her affection, cleaning the scraped knees and offering a sweet to dry the tears. There, it's over now. Now tell me, will this little scratch stop you from running faster than Lucas?" The little one would smile through the tears, shaking their head. "Then go on. I want to see if you can catch him this time." At lunchtime, the aroma of homemade food invaded the environment, making the children run to wash their hands, eager to sit at the table. Sarah cooked with the same love with which she cared for each one. Lucas helped set the plates and divide the portions of food, proud of what they did there. He saw in his grandmother's eyes how much she loved each child as if they were her own. "Grandma, will these children ever remember us one day?" he asked while eating. Sarah looked at him with tenderness, holding his hand on the table. "Lucas, the love we give is never lost. Even if life takes them far away, they will always carry a little piece of what they experienced here." In the afternoon, the children gathered for story time. Sarah had a collection of old books, full of tales that enchanted the little ones. She read aloud, gesturing and changing her voice to bring the characters to life. Lucas loved this part of the day because he could see on the children's faces the same enchantment he felt when he first heard those stories. And so the prince managed to find his way back home, thanks to the help of the little star that lit his path. Sarah closed the book, smiling at the attentive eyes. "What did we learn from this story?" Lucas, always quick, answered first. "That even the smallest lights can guide someone back home." Sarah smiled, caressing her grandson's hair. "That's right, my love. There is always a light for those who know how to look." The end of the day was approaching, and the parents started to arrive to pick up their children. The goodbyes were filled with hugs and promises that it would all be repeated the next day. Some mothers looked at Sarah with gratitude, holding her hands tightly. "I don't know what we would do without you," said one of them, her eyes welling up. Sarah just smiled, never expecting praise. For her, caring for the children was a mission, something she did without expecting anything in return. Lucas, seeing how much his grandmother was loved, felt an immense pride. "Grandma, I want to be just like you when I grow up." Sarah laughed, hugging him tightly. "My love, if you keep that kind heart, it will be more than enough." When the last child said goodbye, Sarah sat on the porch, feeling the cool night breeze caress her face. Lucas sat down beside her, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. "Do you think we'll always have this life, Grandma?" the boy asked with a slightly apprehensive tone. Sarah sighed, pulling him closer. Life changes all the time, Lucas. But as long as we have each other, we'll always have a home. The boy leaned his head on her shoulder, closing his eyes for a moment. He didn't know what the future held, but he was sure of one thing. Next to his grandmother, he felt safe. And nothing and no one could change that. Sarah got up, taking one last look at the now silent backyard before closing the door. The day had been long, but her heart was full. What she didn't know was that this routine, so full of love, was about to be cruelly and unexpectedly destroyed. The aroma of coffee and homemade bread still lingered in the air as Sarah set the table for the children. The sound of children's laughter filled the small house, creating a cozy atmosphere, almost untouched by the world outside. Lucas helped his grandmother serve the glasses of milk, smiling as he watched the little ones vying to see who could eat faster. "Calm down, children. No one is going to steal your snack," Sarah joked, handing out a new tray full of cookies. But in the next instant, a bang made all the laughter cease. The front door was broken down and uniformed men burst into the house, guns drawn, shouts echoing all around. The shock was instant. The children started to cry, clutching each other's hands, while Sarah turned, startled, not understanding what was happening. "What is this? For God's sake, what is going on?" Her voice trembled, but no one answered. Lucas jumped out of the chair, running towards his grandma, but one of the men held his arm, preventing him from reaching her. "Grandma, what are they doing?" he screamed, trying to break free. Sarah felt her heart tighten as she saw the despair in her grandson's gaze. "Please let this boy go. He has nothing to do with this," she pleaded, but no one seemed willing to listen. One of the officers approached, holding her hands firmly behind her back, and before Sarah could react, she felt the cold metal of the handcuffs encircling her wrists. Shock took over her body, and involuntary tears streamed down her wrinkled face. "This must be a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong." Her voice was almost a whisper, but the hardness in the officer's expression indicated that nothing there would be revised. The children screamed, some crouching under the table, others clinging to the officer's legs, trying to stop them from taking Sarah away. "Grandma Sarah, don't let them take you," one of the boys cried, clinging to the hem of her apron. "Stay calm, my loves. Everything will be all right," she tried to say, but her own voice failed to convey confidence. Lucas, in despair, threw himself at the officers, dragging his grandmother away, punching and kicking, unconcerned with the uneven force of the situation. "Leave her alone! She didn't do anything! My grandma only helps people!" the boy screamed, struggling against the arms that held him with brutality. But his resistance was in vain. Sarah was dragged out, her feet barely touching the ground. The sun shone outside, but for her, the light seemed to have disappeared completely. On the sidewalk, neighbors watched in shock, some whispering, others holding their mouths with their hands, incredulous at the scene. A woman approached, trying to intervene. "This is an outrage. This woman has never done anyone any harm." But she was ignored. Sarah felt everyone's eyes on her, the silent and cruel judgment of those who did not know the details, but had already formed an opinion. Her heart ached not for the humiliation, but for the panic etched on Lucas's face. The boy managed to break free for a brief moment and ran to her, clinging to his grandmother's leg with all his might. "No, you can't take my grandma. I have no one but her." He sobbed uncontrollably, his tear-filled eyes begging for some spark of compassion. Sarah felt her chest tear apart inside, the instinct to protect him fighting against the cruel reality unfolding before them. "Lucas, my love, listen to me," she said, her voice choked, trying to bend down to look him in the eye. "Everything will be all right. You have to be strong." But before she could say anything else, an officer violently pulled Lucas away, pushing him back. The boy fell to his knees on the dirt ground. His breathing quickened in despair as he watched the only person he loved being thrown into the car. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed like a final blow. He leapt up, running to the vehicle, banging on the windows with open hands. "Grandma, Grandma, please don't go." The pain in his voice made Sarah close her eyes, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I love you, my boy," she murmured, even though she knew he couldn't hear. The car sped off, kicking up dust on the asphalt, and all Lucas could do was run after it until his legs couldn't take it anymore. The children outside cried, some being held by parents who arrived and tried to understand what had happened. Their little faces were stained with tears, their clothes dirty from the ground where they had thrown themselves, trying to prevent the inevitable. A mother hugged her son tightly, looking in the direction the car had disappeared. "My God, what will become of that boy now?" Her voice reflected the thought of everyone around. Lucas, still on his knees in the middle of the street, stared into the void, his chest rising and falling irregularly, feeling a pain he had never experienced. His grandmother had been taken away, and he had no way to stop it. Sarah, inside the vehicle, felt her trembling hands on her lap. The silence of the car was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the radio the officers ignored. Her heart beat erratically, and her mind replayed the scene of Lucas begging them not to take her away. He was alone now. The thought prompted a new wave of tears to threaten to fall, but she took a deep breath, forcing herself to keep her head held high. She didn't know what was happening, but one thing she was sure of: she was not guilty. Lucas remained there, too weak to move, as the neighbors gradually dispersed. The children who were still around sobbed softly, not fully understanding what had happened, only feeling that something terrible had settled in the house where once there was only love. Lucas clenched his fists tightly, feeling his chest burn. He wouldn't leave it at that. He would find a way to bring his grandmother back, even if he had to face the whole world for it. The sound of the bars closing echoed through the cold prison corridors, and Sarah felt the weight of this new reality fall on her shoulders. Her wrinkled hands trembled slightly as she held the thin blanket they had given her, the rough fabric contrasting with the comfort of the home she had left behind. Her lost gaze wandered over the dirty walls of the cell, but her mind was far from there. Lucas, the image of her grandson crying in the street, his desperate eyes as he was forcibly pulled away, replayed without rest. "My God, what will become of him?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. She felt a tightness in her chest, a suffocating anguish, for she knew that Lucas had no one else. He was just a boy, and now he was alone in the world. On the other side of the city, Lucas was huddled in the back seat of an official car, his face stained with tears, his body trembling not from cold, but from fear. The house that had been his refuge for so long, where he woke up to the smell of Sarah's coffee and fell asleep to the sound of her stories, now seemed like a distant dream. He felt like a discarded object, taken to a place he didn't know, with no explanation, only cold and bureaucratic orders that it was best for him. "Where are they taking me?" he asked with a choked voice, trying to disguise the sobs that still threatened to escape. The driver looked in the rearview mirror, showing no emotion. "To a public shelter. It's where children without guardians stay." The words were like a blow. Without guardians, without a family, without his grandmother. The arrival at the shelter was even worse than he imagined. The building was large, but lifeless. The walls, though colorful, seemed dull, lacking the joy that had always existed in Sarah's house. As soon as he entered, he felt the curious gazes of the other children, some whispering, others just watching, as if they were trying to discover his story. Our staff member guided him to a shared room, where there were bunks lined up and few belongings scattered around. "This will be your bed. Tomorrow we'll talk about your situation." The sentence was delivered robotically, without any empathy. Lucas didn't respond. He just climbed onto the hard mattress and stared at the ceiling, feeling an emptiness growing inside him. Meanwhile, in the community where Sarah took care of the children, shock and indignation spread like wildfire. Parents gathered at the door of the house where they had so often left their children with confidence, unable to believe what had happened. "She wouldn't do that. I know she wouldn't," exclaimed a mother, clutching her daughter's backpack against her chest, as if holding something that could disappear at any moment. Others murmured words of support, but uncertainty hung in the air. The children, without fully understanding, simply asked when they could see Grandma Sarah again, but no one had answers. In the cold, damp cell where time seemed to drag on as a silent punishment, Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on forming. The smell of moldy concrete and rusted metal filled the small space, making the environment even more suffocating. But none of that mattered. The cold that enveloped her did not come from the icy walls, but from Lucas's absence. She knew that by now her grandson was alone, somewhere unknown, surrounded by strangers, trying to understand why his life had been turned upside down. The thought of the boy waking up in a bed that wasn't his own, without the familiar scent of his home, without the security of her arms, made something inside her slowly shatter. She could imagine him looking around, confused, waiting for her to come and get him at any moment. But that hope would be crushed day after day. Her heart ached not for what they were doing to her, but for what they were taking away from him. Lucas was not just a grandson. He was her reason for living, the only joy that remained after so many losses. She had promised him that she would always be around, that she would always take care of him. And now he was helpless, with no one to protect him. Sarah ran her trembling hands over her face, feeling the weight of reality crushing her chest. She thought of the nights when she would lovingly tuck him in, the way he smiled when she told stories before bed. How could anyone believe that she would harm a child? How had they managed to distort everything so cruelly? She looked at the small space she now called a cell. Nothing there belonged to her. Nothing had life. The bars that surrounded her seemed more than just a physical obstacle. They were the symbol of the injustice that separated her from her grandson. But even behind those bars, she promised herself that she would find a way to protect him. Even if the world had turned against her, even if everything seemed lost, she would not accept this fate. "Lucas, I'm still here, my love, and I won't give up on you," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Her body was imprisoned, but her soul kept fighting. The cold of the concrete walls seemed to seep into Sarah's bones, making each night longer than the one before. The dim light of the small lamp flickered from time to time, casting shadows in the empty cell that was now her world. She sat on the edge of the thin mattress, her hands folded in her lap, trying to warm herself. Her mind wouldn't stop, trapped by a single concern. Lucas. What could be happening to him? Who would be taking care of her grandson? The boy she had raised with so much love was now alone, lost in an unknown place. "My God, please protect that boy," she murmured softly, clenching her trembling hands. She wanted to believe he was safe, but a grandmother's heart always knew when something was wrong. On the other side of town, in a shared dormitory, Lucas huddled under the thin blanket, his eyes wide in the dark. The shelter was not his home. It didn't have the smell of Sarah's fresh morning coffee, nor the soft blanket she always folded with care. There he was just one among many, a stranger amidst children who had already lost everything. The day had been hell. As soon as he arrived, some older boys surrounded him, mocking his dirty clothes and swollen eyes from crying so much. "Look, the new crybaby," one of them said, pushing him against the wall. Lucas felt his stomach churn but didn't react. "What's wrong? The criminal grandma's not here to defend you." The laughter echoed through the hallways, and the boy felt the shame burning his face. He wanted to shout, to say that his grandmother wasn't a criminal, that it was all a mistake, but it wouldn't make a difference. Nothing he said would change what people thought. Sarah tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw her grandson's face. He must be afraid. Whenever Lucas had nightmares, she was there to hug him, whisper that everything would be all right. Now he was alone with no one to protect him. "I wonder if he ate today," she whispered to herself, feeling a lump in her throat. Lucas never liked to eat when he was sad, and if no one noticed, if no one insisted, he would go hungry. The thought made her eyes fill with tears, but she blinked rapidly, refusing to give in to despair. She needed to be strong, even there, in that place where everything seemed hopeless. Lucas tossed and turned on the hard bed, trying to find a more comfortable position. But the biggest problem wasn't the mattress or the thin blanket. It was the silence. The silence there wasn't the same as at Sarah's house, where sometimes all you could hear was the wind rustling the curtains or the soft hiss of the kettle on the stove. This silence was different, heavy, full of loneliness. The only sound was the muffled crying of other children, hidden under the blankets, each living their own pain. He took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears, but the longing was overwhelming. "Grandma, I want to go home," he whispered, hugging himself in a futile attempt to feel some comfort. Sarah looked at the small window of her cell, where the dark sky stretched endlessly. She thought of how many times she had looked at the sky with Lucas, sitting on the porch counting stars. "Look at that one, Grandma. It looks like a little car." He always saw shapes in the stars, and she laughed, making up stories about each one. Now he had no one to tell stories to. She felt the tears streaming down her face and closed her eyes, embracing the silent pain that consumed her. "Stay strong, my boy," she whispered to the wind, hoping that somehow he could hear her. Lucas turned on his side, breathing irregularly. He knew no one would hear him there, no one cared, but still he closed his eyes and whispered softly into the darkness, "I promise, Grandma, I'll get you out of there." Sarah no longer felt the same strength as before. The days in prison were long, the nights seemed endless, and her body was beginning to yield to the strain. The rationed food, constant cold, and silent sadness corroded her spirit. The tiredness seemed to bend her bones, and a persistent cough began to manifest, making every breath a painful effort. Sitting in the corner of the cell, she huddled under the thin blanket, trying to contain the tremor that seized her body. Her thoughts were always on Lucas, wondering if he was eating properly, if he could sleep, if anyone hugged him when he cried. "I need to see him," she whispered to herself, feeling her chest ache not only from the illness that was setting in, but from the absence that consumed her. Lucas, in turn, could no longer bear the weight. Each day in the shelter seemed like an endless punishment, each night a cruel reminder that his grandmother was alone, suffering, and he could do nothing. The frustration grew inside him like an uncontrollable fire. Since he had been taken to that place, he had tried to remain invisible, but now all he wanted was to escape. He needed to find her. He needed to see with his own eyes that she was okay. One night, when the shelter was silent, he waited until everyone fell asleep. His heart pounded hard in his chest as he slowly pushed open the dormitory window. The icy air of the early morning hit his face, but he did not hesitate. The children of the community also felt Sarah's absence. Before, there had been a home where they could stay while their parents worked, a safe place, full of laughter and stories. Now many of them were on the streets, with no one to care for them, exposed to danger. Some mothers tried to take turns helping, but without success. "If only Sarah were here," murmured a woman, watching her child playing alone on the sidewalk, without the joy of before. Her absence was a void that spread throughout the neighborhood, and the looks laden with uncertainty showed that without her, nothing was the same as before. Lucas ran through the deserted streets, his heart beating in his chest like a war drum. He knew the prison was far away, but it didn't matter. He could no longer wait. He could no longer bear the thought of his grandmother suffering without knowing that he was fighting for her. His legs ached with every step, but he continued, driven by desperation. "I just need to see her. I just need to tell her I'm here," he repeated to himself like a mantra, trying to ignore the fear growing inside him. The city was asleep, but for him the whole world was screaming. Inside the cell, Sarah coughed hard, feeling a sharp pang in her chest. The weariness seemed to take over, and her head spun as if she were about to faint. "I can't stay like this," she thought, trying to get up, but her legs gave way. She knelt on the cold floor, feeling tears streaming down. "Lucas, my boy, where are you now?" The uncertainty was worse than any illness. If only she could see him. If only she could hold his hand, perhaps her heart would find the strength to resist it all. Lucas turned the corner, feeling his lungs burning. The prison was just ahead, surrounded by imposing bars and guards with impassive looks. He knew he couldn't just walk in, but the need to see Sarah spoke louder than any logic. He approached with hesitant steps, trying to find a way to slip by unnoticed. Before he could plan anything, a firm hand gripped his shoulder, pulling him back. "What do you think you're doing here, boy?" The deep voice made his blood run cold. The improvised plan had ended before it even began. That night, as Lucas was dragged back to the shelter and Sarah remained ill in the darkness of her cell, fate seemed determined to keep them apart. But inside them, hope still burned, even if in nearly extinguished embers. Lucas was sitting on the floor of the shelter's hallway, his back against the cold wall, his arms crossed over his knees. He didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to play with the other children. All he wanted was his grandmother, but the last attempt to find her had ended in failure, and now he was there, alone, feeling more abandoned than ever. The murmur of voices echoed down the hallway, coming from the room where some social workers were discussing. He wasn't paying attention until he heard a name that made his body stiffen. "Mrs. Miller. Yes, there's already a date set for the trial." The case was quick. Since the evidence is convincing, the prosecution is pushing for the maximum sentence. Lucas's heart stopped for an instant. He felt a lump forming in his throat, and his breathing became ragged. maximum sentence. He didn't know exactly what that meant, but the way the women were talking, it seemed final, something with no return. He approached the half-open door, holding his breath so as not to be noticed. The voices continued. "I don't see a way out for her. The case has taken on major proportions. It's being treated as an example. When the conviction comes out, the judge won't have a choice." Lucas felt his legs weaken. Conviction. He closed his eyes, trying to push the words out of his mind. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be the end. His grandmother was innocent. Everyone knew that. How could they want to do something like that to her? Anger mixed with despair, creating a storm inside him. "I need to do something. I need to save Grandma." In prison, Sarah felt the weight of the days on her shoulders. Her body remained weak, the cough persistent, but nothing hurt more than the uncertainty. Until that moment, no one had explained to her what would happen. All she knew was what the guards commented in the corridors, looks of pity cast in her direction, as if her fate had already been sealed. But that morning, finally, something changed. A door opened, and a middle-aged man wearing a frayed suit entered the room where she was waiting. "Mrs. Miller, I'm your public defender," he said, pulling up a chair to sit across from her. Sarah watched him cautiously, trying to understand if he brought good news or just another blow from fate. "Finally, someone came to explain to me what's going on," she said, her voice hoarse but firm. The man sighed, ruffling the papers in his hands. "The case against you is serious. The charges are serious and the trial will be quick. We need to prepare." Sarah felt her heart tighten, as if an invisible fist were crushing her chest. The cold cell around her seemed to shrink, becoming suffocating, but none of that mattered. Nothing mattered more than Lucas. "And my grandson, where is he?" Her voice came out trembling, but charged with urgency, completely ignoring the lawyer's words as he tried to explain the gravity of the situation. She didn't want to hear about legal strategies, appeals, or possibilities of reduced sentences. What really mattered to her, what made her heart beat faster and her breath catch in her throat, was knowing where her boy was. The man in front of her hesitated. It was only for an instant, but it was enough for Sarah to understand that the answer wouldn't be good. He cleared his throat, his eyes avoiding hers, as if he already knew that would shatter her. "He's in a shelter." Sarah blinked a few times, as if her own body refused to believe what she had just heard. The pain came like a cold blade, cutting deep, tearing her soul from the inside out. Her body lost strength for a moment, and she had to hold on to the cell bars to keep from faltering. "He's alone," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone, and the mere idea of Lucas in an unknown place, surrounded by strangers, with no one to protect him, made her chest burn with despair. She could bear the humiliation of prison, the cruel judgment of society, but knowing that her grandson was helpless was an unbearable torment. The lawyer remained silent, lacking the courage to say any word of consolation. What could he say? Sarah took a deep breath, trying to gather the strength she had left. The cold bars pressed against her trembling hands, but what kept her standing was not the icy iron. It was the memory of Lucas, his innocent smile, his soft voice calling her grandma before falling asleep. "If I'm convicted, what will become of him?" Her question hung in the air like a heavy sentence. The lawyer averted his gaze, shuffling through his notes, avoiding looking at her. The silence was the worst answer Sarah could receive. She closed her eyes for an instant, feeling the tears burning her skin. She wouldn't let this be the end. She wouldn't allow Lucas to grow up without love, without someone fighting for him. If the system wanted to take her away from her grandson's life, then she would fight against it until her last breath. The spotlights were focused on Claire Carter, and that was exactly what she wanted. Sitting in front of the cameras with a firm demeanor and calculated gaze, she adjusted her posture before beginning the live interview. Sarah Miller's case had become a true spectacle, and Claire knew how to make the most of every second of media attention. The newspapers featured striking headlines, reinforcing the narrative that the prosecution was combating the evil that threatened the city. "Justice will be served," said one of them. "End of impunity for disguised criminals," highlighted another. But Claire wanted more. She needed to ensure that her image was associated with victory, control, and order. With a confident smile, she looked directly into the camera, projecting her voice clearly. "For years, criminals have hidden behind friendly faces, deceiving everyone with false good intentions. But now that's over. My commitment is to the truth and to the safety of our children. We won't let fear paralyze us. We'll clean this city of all those who threaten the most vulnerable. The tone was firm, almost theatrical, laden with a conviction that bordered on exaggeration. She knew her audience wanted direct answers, wanted to see action, and she would give them exactly that. The prosecution was not only convinced of Sarah's guilt, but would ensure that she paid for what she did. As Claire delivered her speech, Lucas was sitting in the shelter's cafeteria, surrounded by other children who ate in silence. The sound of the television filled the room, and upon hearing his grandmother's name, he looked up. On the screen, Claire Carter's image dominated the news. Lucas's stomach churned as he watched her speak with such confidence, as if every word were an absolute truth. He felt his fingers tighten around the edge of the table, anger mingling with fear. How could someone lie like that? How could they turn his grandmother into a monster? The prosecutor's voice continued to echo through the hall. It's our duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and that's exactly what we're doing. This case is not just about a crime, it's about ensuring that our city no longer tolerates this kind of threat. The children around Lucas didn't seem to fully understand what was happening, but some whispered, exchanging confused glances. To them, the television always told the truth, and if the woman said Sarah was dangerous, then maybe it was true. Lucas felt a knot forming in his throat. They were believing her. The reporters kept asking questions, and Claire, always prepared, answered with the calm of someone who had rehearsed every word. The accused had her chance. The evidence speaks for itself. The justice system is doing what must be done. Lucas felt his blood boil. Evidence? What evidence? Who could accuse his grandmother without knowing what she really did for everyone? He wanted to shout, wanted to tell everyone that it was a lie, but his voice seemed trapped inside him. He looked around and realized that no one would do anything. For everyone, what was on television was the absolute truth. The interview continued, with Claire making the most of every second to reinforce her image as the relentless defender of justice. We cannot allow fear to prevent us from acting. When a threat arises, it is our duty to eliminate it. We're just getting started. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. She spoke of his grandmother as if she were something that needed to be removed, as if she wasn't a person, as if she wasn't the woman who cared for so many children. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the tears, but the outrage grew within him like an uncontrolled fire. When the broadcast ended, the silence that took over the shelter was almost deafening. Lucas continued to stare at the dark television screen, as if expecting that somehow the truth could emerge there, amidst the distorted reflections of his own face. His heart raced, an erratic rhythm of frustration and helplessness. That woman's words still echoed in his mind, repeating themselves like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Claire Carter was manipulating everything, turning his grandmother into a trophy for her own ambition. The fake smiles, the rehearsed speeches, the way she portrayed herself as a heroine for all to see. Lucas could see through the mask she wore. He knew what was a lie. He knew that Sarah wasn't the monster they painted her as. He knew that his grandmother was the kindest woman in the world. And yet, no one else seemed to see the truth. Lucas felt a lump forming in his throat, and his stomach churned with the injustice that took over everything. This cannot continue like this. Someone needed to do something. Someone needed to stop that woman before it was too late. But who? Who would listen to an 8-year-old boy? The world seemed too big, too scary, and he was small, just an insignificant piece in this cruel game. Reality was overwhelming. He had no power, no voice, no nothing but the certainty that his grandmother was innocent. But what could he do with that? His chest rose and fell with quickened breathing, and his fingers clenched into trembling fists. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run up to someone and tell them they were making a terrible mistake. But who would believe him? He was just a boy. Lucas's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back quickly, refusing to let them fall. Crying wouldn't change anything. Feeling small and powerless wouldn't save his grandmother. He took a deep breath, trying to control the storm within himself. If no one was going to listen to a boy, then he would find a way to be heard. No matter how, but he would make it happen. Because if there was one thing Sarah had taught him, it was that right needs to be defended, even when it seems impossible. And at that moment, Lucas decided that he would find a way to fight. Sarah felt that something inside her was fading away. The days passed without her having any news from the outside world, without knowing where Lucas was, without hearing his voice or feeling the warmth of his embrace. Time in prison was not just a punishment, but a slow and cruel nullification of hope. The hours blended together, the days lost meaning. The constant cough weakened her body, and the few remaining forces seemed to be drained by the cold of that place. She tried to stay strong, but the weight of loneliness and injustice made every moment more unbearable. Sitting in the corner of her cell with trembling hands resting on her lap, she murmured to herself, almost voiceless, "Lucas, my love, are you okay?" But the only answer was the oppressive silence around her. At the shelter, Lucas felt a pain that seemed to grow with each passing day. Sarah's absence was a hole in his chest, an emptiness that no one seemed to notice. He kept himself away from the other children, avoided conversations, avoided games. When night came, he would stay awake for hours, staring at the dark ceiling of the dormitory, feeling a suffocating tightness in his chest. He wanted to run away. He wanted to find her, but he didn't know how. Fear and helplessness consumed him, and each new day was a cruel reminder that he was alone. The shelter assistants tried to offer words of comfort, but nothing helped. No one could replace his grandmother. No one understood what she meant to him. Emma watched Lucas from afar, worried about the way the boy seemed to wither away. He didn't talk much, didn't ask for anything, but it was impossible to ignore the sadness stamped on his face. She saw him walking slowly through the corridors, always downcast with slumped shoulders, as if he were carrying a weight too heavy for his age. Emma had dealt with many children in difficult situations, but there was something about Lucas that made her question herself. He wasn't just a directionless orphan. He still had someone who was imprisoned fighting against something much bigger. And if no one was trying to help them, and if the truth was being ignored. One night as she passed through the dormitory hallway, Emma stopped when she heard a low, almost imperceptible sound. She leaned against the half-open door and peeked inside. In the corner of the bed, huddled under the thin blanket, Lucas was sobbing softly, trying to hold back his tears. Her heart tightened. She couldn't imagine the pain of that boy. She approached slowly, pulling up a chair and sitting beside the bed. "Lucas, do you want to talk?" she asked, her voice soft. The boy didn't respond immediately. He rubbed his eyes with his small hands and remained silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice came out broken. "I just want my grandma back." Sarah, in her cell, felt the cold of the night pierce her bones. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the smell of coffee in the morning, the voices of the children filling her house, Lucas's laughter. But all of it seemed so distant that she began to wonder if she had dreamed it. Maybe she had never had that life. Maybe she had never been happy. Would she ever get out of there? Would she see Lucas again? The uncertainty was the worst punishment. Emma remained by Lucas's side for a while, saying nothing, just respecting his pain. The boy sniffled, clutching the pillow tightly, as if he wanted to disappear inside it. "You really miss her, don't you?" Emma asked, knowing the answer before even hearing it. Lucas nodded without raising his face. "She was everything to me. And now, she's alone." His voice failed, and Emma felt a lump in her throat. In prison, Sarah closed her eyes, letting a tear escape. Hope, which had always been her greatest strength, was crumbling. And if no one believed in her anymore? And if she never saw Lucas again? For the first time, she felt afraid to close her eyes and never wake up again. Emma sat in her small office at the shelter, her mind restless. Since she started paying attention to Sarah Miller's case, something didn't seem right. The accusations were too heavy, the trial rushed, and Prosecutor Claire Carter spoke with an almost rehearsed conviction, as if she were more concerned with her own reputation than with the truth. She picked up her tablet and started researching. The prosecutor was known for building careers based on high-profile cases. In recent years, several of her cases were marked by controversial decisions, harsh sentences, and suspicions of evidence tampering. Why didn't anyone question this? How could a woman like her keep winning? Emma felt a chill down her spine. She had seen this before. Some people in the system didn't care about the truth, only about numbers and results. Claire's name was associated with quick convictions without thorough investigations. One case in particular caught her attention: a single mother who was imprisoned for allegedly neglecting her son, but months later, it was discovered that the child had been taken from her based on inconsistent testimonies. The court never reviewed the sentence. Could Sarah Miller be another victim of this flawed system? Emma sighed, feeling the weight of that discovery. If she was right, it meant that an innocent woman was about to be convicted. The door of the room opened slowly and Lucas appeared, hesitant. His eyes were tired, the deep circles betraying sleepless nights. "You said you wanted to ask me some questions," he mumbled, pulling up a chair. Emma put down her tablet and focused on the boy. "Yes, Lucas. I wanted to know about your grandmother, about what your life was like before all this happened." The boy bit his lip, looking at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice came out choked. "My grandmother never did anything wrong. She helped everyone. If someone needed food, she gave it. If a child had nowhere to stay, she took care of them." He took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears. "She taught me to always help people, to always do the right thing, but now they're treating her like a monster." Emma heard every word carefully, feeling her heart tighten. Lucas did not seem like a child who had been raised by someone cruel. On the contrary, there was a rare sense of justice in him for his age. "Lucas, do you remember anything strange before your grandmother was arrested? Someone who appeared suddenly? Any weird conversation?" The boy frowned, trying to remember. "Before they took her, there was a man who showed up there. He asked questions about the house, about the children. But my grandmother became suspicious. She said there was something strange about him." Emma felt a chill run down her skin. Maybe Sarah already knew they were plotting something against her. Emma looked at Lucas and saw something different in him. It wasn't just sadness. It wasn't just the dejected look of a child who had lost everything overnight. It was something deeper, something that shone through the pain. It was determination. The boy clenched his fists by his sides, as if he wanted to contain the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overflow. His eyes, once dull with suffering, now carried a spark of conviction, a purpose that fear could not erase. "If my grandmother is in jail for something she didn't do, then I need to help prove she's innocent," he said. And his voice, despite his young age, came out firm, without hesitation. It wasn't a request. It was a decision. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Lucas was not just a victim of injustice. He wasn't there waiting to be saved. He was ready to fight, to do whatever it took to bring Sarah back. And that made all the difference. She crossed her arms and took a deep breath, absorbing that moment. How many children faced with such a tragedy would be lost in despair? How many would give up, believing that nothing could be done? But Lucas was there, ready to challenge a system that crushed him, ready to face the truth no matter how cruel it was. Emma realized she wasn't alone in this fight. Until that moment, she had felt the weight of the investigation on her shoulders, as if she were the only one responsible for fixing that mistake. But now, looking at Lucas, she knew she had an ally, someone as motivated as she was to reveal what really happened. She crouched down a bit to be at the boy's eye level and firmly held his shoulders. "We're going to find out the truth, Lucas. But I need you to trust me. We need to be smart. And above all, we need to be careful." Lucas nodded, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and determination. "I trust you, but promise me you won't give up." Emma felt a lump tighten in her throat. She couldn't fail him. She couldn't allow that child to go through another disappointment. She nodded, gently squeezing his shoulders. "I promise." And at that moment, she understood that she needed to go deeper. It wasn't enough just to find inconsistencies in the case. It wasn't enough to question. She would have to dig, insist, challenge, and if necessary, face the entire system. Because now it wasn't just about justice, it was about keeping that promise. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, cameras, and spectators filled the hall, all anxious for the trial that had gripped the city. In the center of this storm, Sarah Miller sat, her aged hands trembling slightly on her lap. The lost look showed more than fear. It showed the exhaustion of someone who no longer had the strength to fight against injustice. In front of her, Claire Carter rose confidently, organizing her papers on the table with the precision of someone who knew she was in control of the situation. High on the pulpit, Judge Robert Carter watched it all in silence, his expression closed but attentive. Emma, sitting in the section reserved for social workers, felt a chill run down her skin. Everything there seemed like a carefully staged theater. Claire moved through the courtroom like a lead artist. Her speech was precise, and her evidence was presented in an almost rehearsed manner. But something didn't seem right. There was a coldness in the way she dealt with the details, as if every word had been measured to create a perfect narrative. Emma crossed her arms, watching closely. She had studied cases like this before. When the prosecution was too emphatic, too confident, leaving no room for questions, something was being hidden. Claire took a deep breath, turning to the judge. Her tone of voice was firm, confident, loaded with authority. "Your Honor, we are faced with one of the most shocking cases in this city. A woman who, under the guise of kindness, hid years of mistreatment and abuse against innocent children." Her words echoed through the courtroom, causing a murmur among those present. Sarah lowered her head, feeling the weight of those accusations crushing her chest. How could someone say such cruel things without even hesitating? Emma watched it all closely. The documents presented by Claire were impeccably organized, testimonies, reports, photos. But something was wrong. Some of the statements seemed too generic, as if they had been copied from other cases. Additionally, the written statements of some children contained words and terms that were too formal to actually be from children. Something was wrong, but no one seemed to notice. Claire turned to the judge, her eyes sharp as blades. "We have an opportunity to show this city that the system works, that people like Sarah Miller can no longer hide behind gestures of false generosity." She walked slowly through the courtroom, letting her words resonate in the silence. "The facts are clear. Witnesses point to a pattern of abuse, neglect, and manipulation. The defendant is not a victim. She is a predator." Emma clenched her teeth. It was a spectacle, a psychological game. Claire wasn't just presenting evidence. She was building a narrative that induced everyone to believe without questioning. Robert Carter, seated on the pulpit, remained motionless, his eyes analyzing every document his wife presented. There was something tense about his posture. He knew Claire well enough to know that she never entered a battle without being completely sure of victory. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. With every word spoken, she felt a piece of her dignity being torn away. She wanted to scream, she wanted to defend herself, but everything seemed distant. The court was not a place of justice for her. It was a place where truth was shaped by the eloquence and power of those who had control over the evidence. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. She would not give Claire Carter the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Emma, restless, pulled out her notepad and began to note the inconsistencies, the copied statements, the carefully planned choice of words, the documents that seemed generalized. If Claire was manipulating the case, there had to be a trail. She looked at Robert Carter, who was now analyzing one of the papers with a slightly tense look. Perhaps he too was beginning to realize that things were not as simple as his wife made them seem. Claire turned to the jury, her posture upright, her eyes shining with satisfaction. "The city is watching. The system needs to be relentless against people who destroy the future of our children." She then made a dramatic pause before concluding, "I ask that this court do justice." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The court was being manipulated, and if no one did something, Sarah Miller would have no chance of defense. The courtroom was absolutely silent when Robert Carter adjusted his glasses and took a deep breath before reading the sentence. Every gaze was fixed on him. Every person in the room held their breath, waiting for the verdict that would change Sarah Miller's fate forever. The defendant kept her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes downcast, her face pale from the wear and tear of the days when her name had been battered by the prosecution and public opinion. She had no more strength to cry or plead. She knew she was facing a system that had already decided her fate long before the trial began. Robert cast his eyes over the document in front of him, hesitated for a second, but soon assumed the rigid posture of a judge who could not show any emotion. His voice echoed through the hall when he announced, "For the crime of child abuse and mistreatment, aggravated by the severity of the reports and the public commotion generated, this court declares the defendant Sarah Miller guilty on all charges. Her sentence will be the death penalty." A murmur ran through the room. Some people sighed, others whispered among themselves, but no one seemed surprised. Claire Carter, seated at the prosecution table, merely smiled, satisfied. Another case successfully closed. She had always known that was the inevitable outcome since the first day she decided to turn that woman into an example. The prosecutor kept her gaze fixed on Sarah, as if she wanted to see her final reaction. But the elderly woman remained motionless, only blinking slowly, as if the words had not even reached her consciousness. Emma, seated in the area reserved for social workers, felt a lump in her throat. Even expecting it, she couldn't accept it. The death penalty? How could they condemn a woman without concrete evidence, without a fair investigation? She looked at Claire, who was squeezing the hand of one of the lawyers with a gleam of triumph in her eyes. The prosecutor didn't care about justice, only about the weight of another victory for her career. Emma tightened her fingers against her knee, feeling powerless. This cannot be happening. On the other side of town, in an isolated corner of the shelter, Lucas held an old toy truck, spinning its wheels without really paying attention to what he was doing. The surroundings were noisy, but his thoughts were far away, lost in the memory of the smell of fresh coffee and the soft touch of his grandmother's hands as she smoothed his hair. Suddenly, he heard a group of staff members talking near the door. He had no intention of eavesdropping, but one phrase made his body freeze. Yes, it was today. The trial is over. Death penalty. Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. He dropped the truck, which fell to the floor and rolled away. His chest tightened so much that he thought he wouldn't be able to breathe. His wide eyes were fixed on the wall in front of him, but his mind was spinning, unable to process those words. His grandmother. Condemned. How was that possible? They couldn't do that. They couldn't. He jumped up, running to the door, but stopped when he heard another woman's voice in the conversation. Prosecutor Claire Carter made sure the case was fast. It was a great triumph for her. Everyone is talking about it. Lucas's heart was pounding. Claire Carter. This woman destroyed his grandmother's life, and now she was celebrating? He bit his lip, holding back the tears that threatened to escape. He couldn't cry. He couldn't appear weak, but inside everything was crumbling. At the courthouse, Sarah was led away by two officers, the handcuffs tightening her already frail wrists. Her breathing was slow, her body light, as if she no longer belonged to herself. So that was it. Her fate was sealed. She would have no other chance. There would be no more days with Lucas. She could no longer cook for the children in the community. The life she had built had been taken from her, and no one even cared. As Sarah was led away, Claire Carter raised a glass of wine in a sophisticated restaurant, surrounded by colleagues from the prosecution who applauded her performance. "Justice was done today," she said, toasting proudly. For her, this was not the end of a story, but just another step towards the rise of her career. Lucas, huddled on the shelter bed, held the pillow against his face, muffling his sobs. His world had been destroyed. But deep in his chest, a new feeling was beginning to grow. If no one else would fight for his grandmother, he would. Emma couldn't get Lucas's expression out of her head when he heard his grandmother's sentence. The boy's gaze carried something beyond suffering, beyond fear. It was a deep pain, one that cuts the soul and transforms a child forever. She had seen many orphans, children abandoned by irresponsible parents, victims of a failed system. But Lucas was different. He wasn't a boy without a family. He had someone who loved him, who raised him with care, and that person was now condemned to death. How do you start over after something like that? How do you teach a child to have faith in justice when everything around proves the opposite? Emma felt a tightness in her chest. This was wrong, and if no one else was willing to question it, then she would. The decision took shape within her with the force of a thunderclap. She needed to investigate. She needed to understand if there was something hidden behind that case. Since the trial, she had already noticed inconsistencies, flimsy evidence that was accepted without question, testimonies that seemed rehearsed. Now, with Sarah's fate sealed, she felt even more determined. If there was any chance of reversing that, she couldn't stand still. On the other side of the city, Claire Carter savored the victory. Seated at a private dinner with investors and political supporters, she maintained an elegant smile as she listened to the praise directed at her. "This was an exemplary case," commented a man at the table, raising his glass. "The prosecution couldn't have handled it better. This is the kind of leadership this city needs." Claire smiled, raising her glass in response. "Justice needs to be swift and efficient. If the system is slow, criminals win. The response came naturally, as if she really believed it. But Claire wasn't a fool. She knew that this case was more than just a successful trial. It was her stepping stone to something bigger. She had been planning to expand her influence for a while. Being a prosecutor wasn't enough. She wanted more. The name Claire Carter would be remembered not just as a relentless advocate for justice, but as a strong candidate for an even higher office. She was already planning her next steps. With the impact this trial had on the city, her candidacy for public office would become inevitable. She just had to maintain control of the narrative. While Claire plotted her ambitious plans, Emma returned to the shelter that night with the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Lucas was sitting in the same position as always, huddled in a corner, staring into the void. Emma took a deep breath and approached. She sat down next to him, not saying anything for a few moments. The boy remained quiet, but Emma knew he felt her presence. "Lucas," she said, her voice low but firm, "I'm going to find the truth." The boy slowly turned his face towards her, his eyes red from crying so much. "But no one cares," he murmured, the despair in his voice breaking Emma's heart. "Everyone has already decided that my grandma is guilty. Everyone has already forgotten who she really is." Emma sighed deeply, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The environment around them seemed to shrink, as if only she and Lucas existed in that moment. The dull gleam in the boy's eyes, the way he held the edge of his shirt with trembling fingers, the silence laden with pain. It all said more than any words he could utter. Carefully, she reached out and took his hand, her fingers wrapping around the boy's small, cold fingers. Lucas's skin was icy, as if all the warmth had been drained from his body by the nights of fear and abandonment. "I care." Her voice came out soft but firm, laden with a silent promise. She held his gaze, her eyes fixed on his, unwavering. She wanted him to know she was serious, that she wasn't just another adult throwing empty words into the wind. Lucas blinked, confused. How many times had he already heard empty promises? How many people had already told him everything would be okay, that he would be safe, only to leave him alone in the darkness? But there was something different about Emma's voice, something that made his chest tighten and his throat go dry. "And if there's something wrong with this case, I'll find it." The firmness in her voice made Lucas feel a thread of hope ignite within him, still weak but present. It was the first time in a long time that someone seemed willing to truly fight. Emma knew her words carried a difficult promise to keep. She didn't know exactly where to start. The evidence was against Sarah, and Claire had the power to destroy anyone who dared challenge her. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that an 8-year-old boy was standing in front of her, holding her hands as if his life depended on it. And maybe it did. She gently squeezed Lucas's fingers, feeling the fragility and strength mixed there. She wouldn't let this child grow up believing that the world was a place where the truth didn't matter. If the system had failed Sarah Miller, then it was her duty to correct that mistake. Lucas swallowed hard, and for the first time allowed himself to believe that someone was truly willing to help him. While in a well-lit and luxurious television studio, Claire Carter adjusted her posture and rehearsed her speech in front of the mirror. "This was a difficult but necessary case," she said, her voice firm and calculated. She knew exactly how to conduct that television special. It wasn't just an informative program. It was a way to consolidate her image as the prosecutor who cleaned the city of evil. A relentless woman of justice who wasn't afraid to make difficult decisions. The producers adjusted the cameras, and Claire smiled to herself. Everything was going as planned. However, on the other side of the city, a social worker was starting to question everything, and that could change the course of this story. Emma watched every detail closely as she walked through the shelter's hallways. Her instinct told her that something was wrong with Sarah Miller's case, but it was just a feeling until then. Now she needed proof, any indication that this conviction was nothing more than a well-orchestrated injustice. She began talking to some of the children who had spent time at Sarah's house, asking simple questions about the period when they were under her care. At first, the answers were almost rehearsed, always the same. She was weird. She wouldn't let us play. Sometimes we were afraid. But something in those answers seemed too forced. Emma realized that when the children were in a group, they gave the same answers, as if they had memorized a script. However, when she spoke to them separately, their stories began to change. She asked a girl who seemed to be around 8 years old about Sarah, and the girl hesitated before answering. "She always made soup for us when it was cold," she said softly, looking around as if afraid someone would hear her. Emma frowned. "And were you afraid of her?" The girl bit her lip, her expression divided between what she should say and what she really felt. "No, but I was told to say yes." Emma's heart raced. Who was instructing these children to lie? The doubt grew even more when she repeated the pattern with other children. They all followed the same logic. They spoke short, repetitive sentences when accompanied, but hesitated and showed uncertainty when talking alone. Emma knew children could be easily influenced, but that wasn't something natural. Someone had shaped those responses. Back at the shelter's office, Emma opened her computer and began reviewing old cases of Claire Carter. She needed to understand how that prosecutor worked, if this kind of quick conviction was something recurrent in her career. The more she investigated, the more patterns began to emerge. Claire specialized in high-impact cases, always involving an alleged perpetrator who should be severely punished. All of her accusations were conducted with the same narrative: someone in a position of trust betraying innocence. And in all cases, the trials were quick, with irrefutable evidence, intimidated witnesses, and children giving guided statements. Emma read about a case that caught her attention. A woman who ran an orphanage had been arrested years ago on charges of negligence and abuse. The children from the place testified against her, but after the conviction, the orphanage was closed and the minors were sent to temporary homes. The problem? Some of these children years later began to talk about how they were pressured to lie. Emma felt a chill down her spine. If this happened before, it could be happening now. Emma took a deep breath, feeling her heart race. The pattern was there, clear as day. Claire Carter was using vulnerable children to build cases that would strengthen her career, and Sarah Miller might just be another victim of this scheme. If this were true, not only was an innocent woman sentenced to death, but several children had also been manipulated to serve an obscure purpose. The social worker closed her laptop, rubbing her face. She needed more. She needed concrete evidence, documents, something that could sustain these findings before the law. Because if she was right, then Claire Carter wasn't just an ambitious prosecutor. She was a dangerous woman. Emma felt she was close to something big, something that could completely change the course of Sarah Miller's case. But to prove her suspicions, she needed documents. She needed to access the official trial records, the full statements from the children, the reports that allegedly proved the mistreatment. Her first step was to try to access the records through the court system. She typed in Sarah's data, hoping the information would appear, but to her surprise, the screen flashed with a cold, direct message: "Access restricted." Emma frowned. She had accessed records from other cases before, and this kind of blockage was uncommon. She tried again, this time searching for the files of other convictions conducted by Claire Carter, but the result was the same: blocked. Her heart raced. That wasn't normal. Someone didn't want that information to be seen. The feeling that she was dealing with something much bigger became even stronger. Frustrated, Emma closed her laptop and massaged her temples. She needed another approach. Perhaps she didn't need documents to find inconsistencies in the case. Maybe she just needed to listen to someone who really knew Sarah, someone who had lived by her side. Lucas. At the shelter, Lucas was sitting in the garden, kicking a rock back and forth, his gaze lost. Emma approached slowly and sat down beside him. "Lucas, I need you to tell me about your grandmother. But not about what people say, but rather about who she really is," she said, her voice calm but loaded with urgency. The boy looked at her distrustful, but there was something in her gaze that made him believe that for the first time, someone really wanted to hear the truth. He took a deep breath before speaking. "My grandmother never yelled at any child, never hit anyone. She always said that words can hurt more than anything, so she taught us to resolve things by talking." He paused, frowning. "She made pancakes every Saturday morning because she said it was our special day. She let us help cook, even when we made a mess. And when someone hurt their knee or was sad, she would always grab a blanket, make hot chocolate, and keep telling stories until we felt better." Emma felt a tightness in her chest. This didn't match the accusations. It didn't make sense for a woman who treated children with such care to be the same person described as cruel and abusive. "Lucas, has anyone ever told you what you should say about your grandmother?" she asked, closely observing his reaction. The boy hesitated before answering. "People keep saying she's evil, but they don't know her. Only I know who she really is," he said, his voice full of pain. Emma took a deep breath. Now more than ever, she knew she needed to continue. Someone was manipulating this case, and she wouldn't stop until she found out who it was. Emma felt a weight in her chest as she tried once again to convince a lawyer to take Sarah Miller's case. With each call, each visit to the defense offices, the answer was always the same: "We can't get involved." Some didn't even bother listening to her arguments. Others, more polite, sighed heavily before denying, claiming that such a high-profile case with an already decreed sentence had no chance of being overturned. "Prosecutor Claire Carter ensured a flawless trial," said one of the lawyers, crossing his arms with a serious expression. "If there's anything wrong with this, no one will want to risk their own career to challenge the court." Emma clenched her fingers against her knee, feeling the frustration growing. How could they ignore the possibility of condemning an innocent person? How could they simply turn their backs when a life was at stake? "I understand that the sentence was given hastily, but there are inconsistencies," she insisted, her voice firm but laden with urgency. "The children who testified are contradicting their statements when not under pressure. There is evidence that this pattern has occurred in other cases." The lawyer merely shook his head, grabbing his briefcase and standing up. "If that's true, then someone more influential will have to expose it. I can't be that person." Emma left the office feeling defeated. The more she tried, the more doors closed. No matter how much evidence she gathered, no matter how many doubts existed, no one wanted to confront Claire Carter. No one wanted to mess with that case. Sarah was completely alone. Meanwhile, in prison, Sarah received the news she had feared since the day she was sentenced. The date of her execution had been set. A prison staff member informed her with an emotionless look, as if reading a simple protocol. "The execution has been scheduled for 4 weeks from now." Sarah felt the air escape her lungs. That was it. Her life was being reduced to a deadline, a number of days that counted down to the end. There was no compassion in the woman's voice who gave her the news, and Sarah had no strength to react. She just lowered her head, feeling the world around her grow even colder, even more distant. At the shelter, Lucas was deteriorating each day. He was no longer eating properly, refusing to leave his room and spending most of his time lying down, staring at the ceiling with empty eyes. His body was growing weaker, and the caregivers began to notice that he was falling ill. "This boy doesn't react to anything," one of the staff members commented, concerned. "He's giving up." Emma watched the scene, feeling a tightness in her chest. Lucas was giving up. He was letting himself be consumed by despair. She knew she couldn't let that happen. If no one else would fight for Sarah, then it was up to her to keep trying. Even if all the doors were closing, she still had to try. Because if she gave up, Lucas would lose everything. Emma was becoming increasingly convinced that Sarah Miller's case was riddled with irregularities. The evidence presented at trial seemed flimsy. The witnesses were children whose statements had changed when they were away from the eyes of adults. But when she decided to go further and try to locate the main witnesses in the case, what she discovered put her on high alert. They had vanished. In the court records, there was the name of a woman who had allegedly testified against Sarah, claiming she heard screams coming from the house and that the children seemed frightened when they were in her care. Emma tried to find her, but when she called the number listed in the case file, she received only an automated message stating that the phone no longer existed. She investigated the address provided, but the place was empty, with no sign that anyone had lived there for months. She searched for any reference to that woman on social media, news or public records, but it was as if she had simply disappeared after the trial. The same thing happened with another key witness, an alleged social worker, who had stated that Sarah had a history of neglect. Emma spent hours trying to find him, but the result was the same. Nothing. No clue, no trace that these people were still in town. It was impossible to believe this was just a coincidence. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered to herself, sitting at her desk at the shelter, with dozens of notes scattered in front of her. If these witnesses were so crucial to Sarah's conviction, Why would they disappear right after? The answer seemed obvious, perhaps because they were never meant to be found. As Emma pieced together her investigation, Claire Carter was at a grand event, surrounded by cameras, reporters, and supporters. Sarah Miller's case had been the perfect springboard for the next step in her career. Wearing an elegant blazer and a confident smile, Claire took the stage and grabbed the microphone. "Today we are safer because justice has been served," she began, her voice firm and calculated. "We have shown that there is no room for abuse in this city, that the system works when competent and dedicated people ensure that criminals are punished." She paused, letting the words resonate. The audience applauded. Then came the bombshell. "And that is why, with great honor and an unwavering commitment to justice, I announce my candidacy for the position of district attorney." Emma felt her stomach churn as she watched the scene unfold on her computer screen. Claire was using Sarah's case as a trophy to propel her campaign, and worse, people were buying that narrative. If she managed to get elected with that image, any chance of overturning Sarah's sentence would disappear forever. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the anger growing inside her. She couldn't let that happen. Now more than ever, she needed to find a way to prove Sarah's innocence, and she needed to do it before it was too late. Emma typed furiously on her keyboard, determined to find something that could overturn Sarah Miller's conviction. After so many barriers, so many blocked files, and so many disappeared witnesses, she knew she was dealing with something big. But if there was one thing she had learned over the years, it was that no lie was perfect. There was always a mistake. There was always something overlooked. Perusing old records, Emma noticed a file linked to Sarah's case, but which had not been presented at the trial. The document was filed under a generic name, without emphasis, as if they had tried to hide it without actually deleting it. A careless oversight. Her heart raced when she opened the file. It was a report of an assisted visit carried out at Sarah's home months before her arrest. The document detailed that the children were well cared for, that the food was adequate, that no reports of mistreatment had been registered, and, most importantly, that there was no evidence of negligence or abuse. Emma read and reread the report, almost disbelieving. If this document existed, it meant that someone had deliberately omitted it during the trial. If it had been presented, Sarah would never have been convicted. Her hands trembled as she printed the report. This was the proof she needed. Now Claire Carter would have to answer for this. In the luxurious campaign office, Claire analyzed a stack of reports on her candidacy. Her rise was meteoric, and each well-rehearsed speech only strengthened her public image. But amid the good news, an urgent call made her frown. On the other end of the line, a tense voice informed her that Emma was meddling where she shouldn't be. Claire was silent for a moment, before closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. The air around her seemed heavy, laden with growing tension. Her fingers slowly slid over the polished wooden desk, as if trying to find an answer there to the problem forming before her. "So it seems we have a problem," she murmured, opening her eyes and looking at her reflection on the laptop screen, where the records of her career shone, impeccable, as if they were unquestionable. But now, there was a crack in her wall of control. She had always known someone might question the case. It was a calculated risk, a remote possibility that had always lurked in the back of her mind. But she never imagined that a simple social worker would have the audacity and persistence to go so far. Not Emma. Not a woman who, at first, seemed just another cog in the system, easily manipulated, easily silenced. Underestimating her was a mistake. The thought irritated Claire more than she cared to admit. She drummed her fingers on the desk's surface, feeling a growing unease spreading through her chest. She couldn't allow her entire empire to crumble because of an amateur investigation. Her gaze hardened. She needed to act before it was too late. On the other side of the city, Emma held the report tightly, her fingers clenched against the edges of the paper as if her very life depended on it. Her heart pounded in her chest. The file she had in her hands was more than just a set of yellowed bureaucracy sheets. It was proof that Sarah Miller had been wrongfully convicted. It was the key to bringing down Claire, to exposing the truth, and above all to saving a life that was about to be erased by a judicial error. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold sweat on her neck. She needed to run. If Claire knew this file had been found, she wouldn't hesitate to do whatever was necessary to cover everything up. Time was running out. Sarah Miller couldn't wait. Every second that passed was a greater risk. Emma looked at the half-open office door and, with one last sigh of determination, clutched the report to her chest and hurried out, not looking back. The truth had to be exposed before it was too late, and she wouldn't allow another innocent person to be silenced. Emma hurried through the prosecutor's building, firmly holding the envelope containing the report that would prove Sarah Miller's innocence. Her heart pounded in her chest as she climbed the stairs, refusing to wait for the elevator. Every second lost could mean the death of an innocent woman. She needed to deliver that evidence to someone who could act. But when she reached the reception desk, she was met with cold, bureaucratic stares. "I need to speak to someone about the Sarah Miller case. I have proof that crucial documents were withheld during the trial," she said, breathless, as she handed over the envelope. The impassive receptionist took the paper and cast a vague glance over it. "The prosecutor's office is busy at the moment. You can leave the documentation and await a response." Emma felt a chill. She couldn't simply await a response. This was their game, delaying everything until it was too late. "No, I need to speak to someone now," she insisted, her voice firm but trembling with urgency. The woman only sighed, adjusting her glasses, before responding in a mechanical tone. "All the prosecutors who could assist you are busy. Come back another day." Emma felt her blood run cold. Were they all busy, or were they all connected to Claire Carter? She clenched her fists, holding back her anger. The truth was there, in her hands, but no one wanted to hear it. While Emma tried to fight against a poisoned system, Sarah was being escorted to a small visitor's room inside the prison. Her trembling hands could barely hold the cold cup of coffee placed in front of her. The officer accompanying her didn't even look in her direction. This would be her last visit. She knew it was the last time she would see Lucas, and her heart broke thinking about the boy. The door opened, and Lucas entered hesitantly, his eyes watery and his face haggard. His body was frail, his breathing irregular, as if he had spent all his strength to be there. When he saw Sarah, he bit his lip and ran to hug her, ignoring the guard's looks. "Grandma," he murmured, his voice choked. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling her grandson's warmth against her, and held the boy's face between her wrinkled hands. "My dear, forgive me, I wish I could stay with you." Lucas shook his head, heavy tears falling. "I know you didn't do anything wrong. I know, Grandma. And I don't want you to go," he sobbed, clinging to her as if he wanted to stop time from moving forward. Sarah took a deep breath, fighting back the urge to cry. "No matter what happens, you have to keep going. Never let them tell you who you are, because only you know that. I love you and I'll always be with you." On the other side of the city, Claire Carter smiled at the organizers of her post-execution event. Everything was being prepared for the moment when she would reaffirm her tough stance against criminals. It was a carefully planned spectacle where she would secure her place as the new district attorney. "This city needs strong leaders," she said to the guests as a photographer captured the scene. "And tomorrow we'll take another step towards a safer future." But while Claire celebrated prematurely, Emma felt despair growing within her. Time was running out, and no one seemed willing to hear the truth. If she couldn't break through that blockade, Sarah would be executed, and no one would ever know they had condemned an innocent woman. Emma paced back and forth inside the shelter's small office, clutching tightly the papers that proved Sarah's innocence. She had already tried to deliver the evidence to the authorities, but every door she knocked on was locked by Claire Carter's influence. Time was running out, and every wasted second was a silent sentence against an innocent woman. If no one in the system wanted to listen, then there was only one option left: find someone who couldn't ignore the facts. It was then that a thought emerged, as clear and inevitable as the injustice of the case itself. Robert Carter. The judge who signed Sarah's sentence was an experienced, respected man, and above all, someone who had the real power to stop that execution. He was not just a name in the case files, he was Claire's husband. Emma stopped suddenly, her gaze fixed on nothingness. If Robert saw the evidence, if he understood the extent of the injustice committed, would he have the courage to defy his own wife? Perhaps not. But he was a judge, and a judge could not ignore such a grave judicial error. If there was a shred of decency in him, this was the only real chance of overturning the sentence. But how to make him listen? How to approach a man protected by his position and by a wife who had already ensured that all conventional routes were blocked. Emma frowned. She could not simply schedule an appointment in his office. She needed to find an alternative path. It was then that she looked at Lucas, sitting in a corner of the office, still fragile, his eyes swollen from crying after his last visit to Sarah. Lucas. He was Sarah's grandson. He was the face of this injustice. If anyone could make Robert stop and listen, it was the boy who was about to lose the only person he loved in the world. Emma knelt beside him, speaking softly but firmly. Lucas, I found evidence that your grandmother is innocent. I tried to deliver it to the authorities, but no one wants to listen. They're all on prosecutor Claire Carter's side. She took a deep breath, hoping he would assimilate it. But there is one person who can change that. The judge who signed the sentence, Robert Carter. He is the only person who can stop this execution. Lucas blinked, trying to process the information. His voice came out weak, laden with fear and disbelief. But he already decided my grandmother is guilty. He doesn't care. Emma held his hands, squeezing them tightly. Maybe he doesn't care, but he cannot ignore the truth if it is placed before him in the right way. You need to be that truth, Lucas. You need to deliver it to him personally. The boy bit his lip, his eyes still full of uncertainty. But there was something there, a thread of hope that Emma needed to cling to before it unraveled. How will I get to him? Emma took a deep breath. She already had a plan. She knew that Robert Carter avoided public exposure and liked to keep his routine discreet, but there was one detail that could be exploited. He always had coffee at the same place every morning, a small cafe far from the courthouse, where he avoided journalists and colleagues. If Lucas appeared there, alone and with the documents in hand, Robert would have no choice but to listen to him. You'll go to him tomorrow morning before he goes to court, Emma explained, grabbing a sheet of paper and scribbling an address. He'll be at this cafe. If you get there with this evidence and ask to speak with him, he won't ignore you. Lucas held the paper, looking at it as if it were a note to a destination he never wanted to visit. But then slowly, he nodded. If this can save my grandmother, I'll go. Emma felt a lump in her throat. It was now or never, and she needed to make sure everything went right. Emma knew that getting Lucas out of the shelter without raising suspicions would be the hardest part of her plan. The place had strict rules, and any unauthorized departure would be reported immediately. But there was no choice. If Lucas did not reach the judge, Sarah would die. Sitting in the small visitor's room, Emma looked at the clock. It was past 10 at night. The shelter was silent, with most of the children already asleep, and the staff reduced to a minimum. It was now or never. She got up and walked to the room where Lucas was. The boy was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching the envelope with the evidence as if his life depended on it. His eyes were wide, full of fear and expectation. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Emma asked softly. Lucas took a deep breath and nodded. "I won't let my grandmother die." Emma knelt in front of him and placed her hands on his shoulders. "You need to be strong. You can't run. You can't look scared. You need to walk confidently, as if you're going somewhere you're allowed to be." The boy bit his lip but held the envelope more firmly. He was ready. The plan was simple. Emma would get Lucas out through the back of the shelter, where there were no cameras, and take him to the side street. There, a taxi would already be waiting to take him to the cafe where Robert Carter had coffee every morning. If all went well, in a few hours, the judge would have the evidence in his hands. Emma looked around and opened the door. They crossed the hallway in silence, with Lucas following her footsteps like a shadow. Her heart was racing with every step, but no staff member appeared. When they reached the back door, Emma unlocked it with the key she had discreetly taken from the supervisor's office. The door opened with a soft creak, and a cold night breeze enveloped them. Lucas hesitated for a second before crossing the threshold, holding the envelope against his chest. Emma knelt beside him and whispered, "As soon as you get there, hand over the papers and ask to speak with Robert Carter. No matter what they say, don't leave until you're heard." Lucas nodded. She felt a lump in her throat as she watched him disappear into the darkness of the street, small and determined. He was Sarah's only hope. On the other side of the city, in a luxurious hall decorated with sparkling chandeliers and impeccably arranged flower arrangements, Claire Carter raised a glass of red wine, while the flashes of cameras illuminated her face, like spotlights of a perfectly rehearsed show. She was the center of attention. Dressed in an elegant dark ensemble, the prosecutor exuded confidence and power. Her lips drew a calculated smile, and her impeccable posture conveyed the image of a woman at the peak of her career, an unwavering figure. The campaign party was in full swing. Illustrious guests circulated through the hall, reporters took notes on every word spoken by influential supporters, and the big screens displayed carefully edited videos, reinforcing the narrative that Claire had built with such dedication. On stage, an enthusiastic presenter extolled her trajectory, narrating each alleged victory with almost theatrical enthusiasm. And it is with immense honor that we celebrate this extraordinary woman, the prosecutor who cleaned our streets, who confronted criminals head-on and ensured justice prevailed. The applause echoed like a calculated wave, perfectly choreographed, and Claire raised her glass in response, savoring the moment. She had worked for this. Every headline, every case won, every impassioned speech against crime was part of her ascent. And now, with her political campaign at its peak, nothing could stop her. Her name was etched in people's minds as a synonym for strength and rectitude. But as Claire celebrated, surrounded by praise and false promises, the evidence of her greatest sham was moving through the city streets, protected only by the determination of a child. Lucas, with the documents firmly clutched against his chest, ran through narrow alleys, his lungs burning with every step. The weight of the truth was in his hands. He knew he could not fail. Every sheet of paper inside that folder was a sentence, a blow against the wall of lies that Claire Carter had built over the years. And as she toasted the future, unsuspecting, the foundation of her impunity was beginning to crumble, because the truth, no matter how muffled, always finds a way to surface. Lucas pressed the envelope against his chest as he approached the cafe entrance. Judge Robert Carter was sitting at his usual table, flipping through a newspaper with an untouched cup of coffee beside him. The atmosphere was tranquil, filled with the low murmur of conversations and the sound of cutlery clinking against china. Lucas took a deep breath and advanced hesitantly, his heart pounding in his chest. His grandmother's life depended on this. He stopped in front of the table, unsure of how to get the man's attention. Robert continued reading, unaware of his presence, until Lucas cleared his throat and said in a trembling voice, "Sir, Sir Judge?" Robert Carter looked up with a weary, impatient gaze, as if already accustomed to people approaching him to discuss cases outside the courtroom. But when he saw the boy standing before him, frowning as he noticed his red eyes and small hands clutching an envelope with extraordinary force, his expression changed. "Can I help you?" he asked in a neutral tone, folding the newspaper and leaning back in his chair. Lucas took a deep breath and held the envelope even tighter. "It's about my grandmother, Sarah Miller." The name made Robert Carter raise his eyebrows, the tension evident in the rigid line of his lips. "She's going to be executed, but she didn't do anything. Please, you need to look at this," he pleaded, pushing the envelope across the table. The judge sighed, picking up the papers without much haste. It was common for relatives to try to appeal in such cases, clinging to any thread of hope. But when he opened the envelope and his eyes scanned the first document, his demeanor changed immediately. It was a detailed care report, proving that months before Sarah's arrest, a professional had inspected the home and found the children to be well cared for. There were no signs of abuse, neglect, or any irregularity. The document had never been presented in court. With each page turned, Robert felt a chill down his spine. There were records of visits to the shelter where the children had been pressured to give negative testimonies. There were archived emails indicating that key witnesses had disappeared shortly after the conviction. It was a fraud, a sham built with surgical precision. His mind was seething. Claire. Lucas, watching the judge's reaction closely, noticed the change in his expression. "Do you see? My grandmother is innocent. They lied," he said, his voice choked. "If you don't do anything now, she'll die." Robert felt an immense weight crushing his shoulders. Blood pounded in his temples. He had condemned an innocent woman to death. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process, trying to deny it, but the truth was there, raw and indisputable. He checked his watch. Cold sweat trickled down his neck. The execution was about to happen. Time was running out. He needed to act. A few minutes later, Robert felt his heart racing as he checked the time. The execution was about to happen. Time seemed to slip through his fingers, and every second lost could be Sarah Miller's last. He gripped the phone tightly, dialing the prison's direct number. His voice came out urgent, authoritative, leaving no room for doubt. "Stop that execution now." His breathing was quickened, and he pressed the receiver against his ear as if it could make time stand still. "This is Judge Robert Carter. I have new evidence proving the sentence was a mistake." On the other end of the line, there was a tense pause before a hesitant response. "Sir, the execution is already in progress. Protocol does not allow interruptions without an official order." Robert stood up so quickly that his chair fell back, echoing in the silent cafe. "I am the damn authority," he shouted, ignoring the looks around him. "If you proceed with this, you will be killing an innocent, and I assure you there will be legal consequences for each one of you." He narrowed his eyes, feeling the anger growing in his chest. "I want to speak to the prison warden now." Lucas, sitting across from him, was trembling. His eyes were fixed on the judge, seeking in him the only hope that remained. The phone fell silent for a few seconds, and then another voice came on the line. "Judge Carter, this is the prison warden. The execution order has already been signed and is being carried out according to protocols." Robert clenched his jaw. "Do you want to follow protocol, or do you want to prevent the state from committing murder? Suspend this now. I'm sending the order in writing this instant." He grabbed his briefcase, pulling out a notepad and quickly scribbling the suspension of the sentence. His heart was beating so hard that he could feel the blood pounding in his head. He looked up and searched for someone who could take the document immediately. The cafe waiter was still watching him, pale. Robert grabbed a large bill from his wallet and placed it in the man's hand. "I need you to run to the courthouse and take this to my office. Tell my secretary to forward it to the prison now." The boy hesitated for a second before nodding and running out the door. But before Robert could breathe, a chilling presence made itself felt. The cafe door opened and Claire Carter entered, her heels echoing on the floor like hammers. Her dark eyes quickly analyzed the scene, and fury etched itself on her face as she saw Lucas sitting there. She understood everything in a matter of seconds. "What the hell are you doing, Robert?" Her voice cut through the air like a knife. The judge straightened his posture, the papers still in his hand. "Correcting a mistake that should never have happened." Claire laughed, but there was no humor on her face. "You're destroying everything for the whim of a child? I built that case. You want to throw your career away?" Robert approached slowly, his eyes cold. "You forged evidence, manipulated witnesses. You condemned an innocent woman to fuel your damn campaign." His breathing was heavy, "and I'm not going to be an accomplice to that." Claire opened her mouth to respond, but her phone rang. She answered hastily, and her expression twisted into pure hatred at what she heard on the other end of the line. "Judge Carter has just suspended the execution." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, controlling her fury. Her empire was crumbling before her. Sarah was sitting in the execution chair, her wrists tightly bound to the metal restraints. Her heart was beating slowly, resigned to the fate that had been imposed on her. The voices of the officials echoed in the background, speaking in low tones, checking protocols, adjusting equipment. This was her end. She closed her eyes, trying to cling to the memory of Lucas, to the touch of his small hands holding hers. It was then that the sound of hurried footsteps filled the room. A door burst open. One of the officers monitoring the execution looked up to see a guard enter, breathless, holding an official paper in his hands. "Stop immediately. The execution has been suspended." Silence fell like a stone over the room. The man controlling the lever hesitated, looking to his superiors, unsure how to react. Sarah slowly opened her eyes, not comprehending. Was it possible? Her eyes rested on the trembling sheet of paper in the guard's hands. The prison warden stepped forward to take it, and upon reading the words, his face hardened. "Release the prisoner. Now." His voice left no room for questioning. The guards hesitated for only a moment before undoing the straps that bound her. Sarah felt her body being freed, her arms numb after being restrained for so long. She was alive. She blinked, still disbelieving. It wasn't the end. Outside, the sound of tires screeching on the asphalt indicated the arrival of a car at high speed. The door opened, and Lucas jumped out before the vehicle even came to a complete stop. "Grandma!" His voice tore through the air like a desperate cry. Emma got out right after him, breathless, but with her eyes shining with relief. Sarah stumbled forward, her knees weak, until she felt the impact of Lucas's small body hurling itself against her. Her hands enveloped her grandson with force, and she buried her face in his hair, inhaling his scent, feeling his life in her hands. She was there, with him, alive. Further away, Claire Carter watched the scene from afar, the phone clutched in her trembling hands. Her mind worked quickly, seeking a way to control the damage, to keep her narrative intact. But it was impossible. Everything was crumbling. The face of Robert Carter was a mask of fury and disgust as he approached her. "Your career is over, Claire, and you know it." She did not respond. She only turned her face away, feeling the blood pounding in her temples, trying to hide the rage that burned within her. The bitter taste of defeat was something Claire Carter had never experienced in such an absolute way. She had lost, and there was nothing more she could do to change that. The murmur around her sounded distant, muffled by the pressure that pulsed in her head. For the first time, Claire was powerless. Her eyes wandered through the courthouse, meeting the faces that now looked at her with contempt or indifference. There were no more cameras exalting her victories, no more applause, only silence and condemning looks. Her empire had crumbled. While Claire sank into her own ruin, Sarah held Lucas's face between her hands, her wrinkled fingers touching her grandson's skin with tenderness, as if she wanted to engrave every feature, every detail. That was the moment she had dreamed of on every lonely night in prison. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with relief, with gratitude. Her moist eyes reflected everything she felt: pain, longing, and above all, hope. "It's over, my love." "It's over." Sarah's voice came out in a choked whisper, as if she still feared that at any moment someone could interrupt that instant and say it was a mistake. But it wasn't. It was real. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his throat, hot tears streaming down his face as he made no attempt to hold them back. How many nights had he dreamed of that moment? How many times had he wondered if he would feel his grandmother's arms around him again, if he would hear her soft voice calling out to him? Now, all of that was before him, within his reach, and for the first time in a long time, he believed. He closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to feel Sarah's tight embrace, the familiar warmth that had been ripped away from him. There was no more fear, no more uncertainty. For the first time in a long time, he could simply breathe without any weight on his chest. Around them, the world continued, but for Lucas and Sarah, it was an eternal moment, a moment of redemption, justice, love. And from afar, Claire watched in silence, tasting the bitter defeat, knowing that this time nothing could change the destiny she herself had written. The courtroom was packed. The murmur of those present echoed off the walls, a mixture of indignation, curiosity, and tension. In the center of the room, Robert Carter sat at the front, his face rigid, his eyes fixed on the woman he knew better than anyone. Claire Carter. She remained standing, her posture tense, but the mask of confidence she always carried was cracked. She knew there was no longer any way to escape. Robert took a deep breath before speaking. His voice was grave, carrying something beyond indignation. It was guilt. He had almost killed an innocent person. His eyes pierced Claire's as if searching for any hint of remorse within her. "We almost killed an innocent person because of your ambition." His voice resonated through the courtroom, silencing every murmur around him. "You manipulated evidence, hid proof, and destroyed lives to advance your career. And I, by trusting you, was an accomplice to that mistake." Claire lifted her chin, trying to maintain her composure. Every decision was made based on the evidence available at the time. Her voice lacked its former firmness. "I did what I thought was necessary to uphold justice." "This is not justice." Robert slammed his fist forcefully on the table, his patience running out. "Justice is ensuring that the truth is heard, that guilt is proven without a shadow of a doubt. You destroyed that. You used a system that should protect the innocent to consolidate your own power." He picked up the gavel in front of him and raised it slightly. "And today we are correcting that mistake." The silence in the room was cut by the sharp sound of the gavel being struck. "The sentence against Sarah Miller is hereby overturned." The state will recognize her innocence immediately. Sarah, seated beside Emma and Lucas, let the air escape her lungs in a low sob. She was officially free. There was no more chain, no more sentence, no more fear. Tears streamed down her face as she turned to Lucas and pulled him into a tight embrace, feeling the small body of her grandson tremble against hers. "We made it, my love." Her voice was soft, choked, but full of relief. "It's over." Lucas did not respond immediately, only holding Sarah with all the strength he had, as if fearing the world might take her away from him again. Emma, beside them, watched the scene with a relieved smile, knowing that after so much suffering, the truth had finally won. Robert Carter closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of his own mistakes fall upon his shoulders. But now, at least, he had done what was right. The courtroom remained in absolute silence as two officers advanced down the aisle towards Claire Carter. Her heels clicked on the cold floor, and her body was tense, but her face tried to hide the humiliation. She, the relentless prosecutor, was now being taken into custody. Her gaze swept the room, searching for any sign of support, but all she found were looks of disapproval. There were no more allies. The system she had manipulated now crushed her without mercy. Robert Carter remained standing, watching as his wife, or rather the woman he thought he knew, had her hands handcuffed. "Claire Carter, you are being arrested for evidence tampering, witness bribery, and obstruction of justice." The officer's voice was cold, unwavering. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." Claire looked directly at Robert, her expression wavering between hatred and contempt. "You destroyed everything, Robert. You threw your own wife to the wolves." Her voice was cutting, but he did not avert his gaze. "No, you destroyed everything yourself." His response was firm, without any hesitation. He would not save her. Not after what she had done. On the other side of the room, Sarah still held Lucas close, the small body of her grandson relaxing slowly, as if he could finally breathe after being suffocated by fear for so long. Robert took a deep breath and walked over to where she was. For a moment he hesitated. How could he ask for forgiveness for something unforgivable? He knelt before her, looking into the tear-filled eyes of the woman whose life he had almost taken. There in front of everyone, the judge bowed before the innocent he had condemned. "There are no words that can undo what has been done. I failed as a judge. I failed as a human being, and for that, I ask for your forgiveness." His voice faltered slightly, but he continued, "You were a victim of a corrupted system. Let me at least try to make amends for that." Sarah remained silent for a moment, studying the man before her. Finally, she took a deep breath and nodded. "I don't know if I can forgive what was taken from me, but I know that you did the right thing when you had the chance, and that is more than many would do." The following is a direct translation of the given text from Portuguese to English, maintaining the same structure, punctuation, and formatting as the original. Robert's eyes shone with gratitude, and he nodded before rising. His eyes searched for Emma in the crowd. Without her, everything would have been different. That woman's courage had saved a life. She deserved recognition. Hours later, at a press conference, Robert Carter looked into the cameras and announced, "If there is a heroine in this story, it's Emma. Against all odds, she fought for the truth. And for that, the system owes an apology not only to Sarah Miller, but to her as well." Emma lowered her head for a moment, not knowing how to deal with the sudden attention. But deep down, she knew this was not about her. It was about justice. And finally, justice had prevailed. The car stopped in front of the modest house that Sarah had once called home. The facade was almost the same as before, except for the light layer of dust accumulated on the days it stood empty. But now everything was different. She was no longer the woman unjustly imprisoned, and Lucas was no longer the scared boy who had his life snatched away from him. They were together again. Lucas jumped out of the car before Emma even turned off the engine, running up to the porch, as if he wanted to prove to himself that this place was still real. Sarah got out of the car with a little more difficulty, feeling her knees tremble with the weight of emotion. Each step was a rebirth. When she reached the door, Lucas was already waiting for her with an anxious smile. "Let's go in, Grandma. Our home is waiting." Sarah stretched out her trembling hand and turned the doorknob. The familiar smell of the place enveloped her immediately, and hot tears welled up in her eyes. No matter how hard they had tried to tear her away from there, this was still her home. She touched the furniture lovingly, feeling time standing still, as if each object had been waiting for her return. "We're back, my love. And this time no one will separate us." Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Robert Carter was sitting in his office, staring at the ring on his finger. The cold metal seemed to weigh more than ever. He had shared a life with Claire, but now he saw the truth clearly. She was not only a relentless prosecutor, she was a woman who destroyed lives for her own ego. He slowly pulled off the ring, feeling the symbolic weight of that gesture. It was the end of everything he had once believed in. As the ring slid off his finger, Robert felt the cold metal slip across his skin, as if he was finally freeing himself from a burden he had carried for years. The discreet sound of the ring landing on the table echoed in his mind, symbolizing not only the end of his marriage, but the definitive break with everything Claire represented. He let out a heavy sigh, leaning back in the worn leather chair, feeling the weight of the past still pressing on his shoulders. Now, there was work to be done. It wasn't just about Sarah Miller. It was about all the people who trusted in justice and were betrayed by a corrupt system. Robert opened one of the files on his desk, one among many awaiting his review. The papers were yellowed with time, some stained by the haste of former clerks who in the past had not bothered to examine the cases carefully. How many of these names belonged to innocents who never had a chance to defend themselves? He ran his fingers over the first page of the dossier, feeling a tightness in his chest as he saw the cold records of convictions that now seemed suspicious. Sarah had been just a piece in a much bigger game. If Claire had manipulated one case, how many more could have been affected? How many men and women had their lives destroyed just to feed the ambition of a prosecutor who saw justice as a stepping stone to power? His name was tarnished. The court he had once respected was now the place where he had allowed an innocent woman to almost be killed. He picked up a pen and began underlining passages from the documents. There were patterns there. Key witnesses gone missing. Flimsy evidence accepted without challenge. Defense attorneys prevented from appealing. Everything indicated that Claire and her team had done this more than once. Robert ran his hands over his face, feeling a mixture of anger and regret. The only way to redeem himself was to ensure that no other Sarah Miller was convicted without evidence. Outside, night fell slowly, casting shadows through the window of his office. This work would not be finished in one night. It might not end in a month, perhaps not even in a year. But he would not stop until every mistake he had helped consolidate was reversed. For the first time in a long while, Robert Carter had a true purpose. And so as Sarah and Lucas rebuilt their lives, Robert began to dismantle the empire of lies he had helped to keep standing. From then on, nothing would be the same. The morning sun illuminated Sarah's house, now full of life. The yard, once silent and empty, was filled with childish laughter, little feet running back and forth and lively voices calling for Grandma Sarah. It was as if time had restored everything that had been taken from her. After all that had happened, Sarah returned to what she had always loved, caring for the children of the community. But this time, she was not alone. After the scandal of the injustice committed against her, the town hall officially supported the work Sarah had always done from the heart. Now volunteers helped with the children's routine, donating time and resources to keep the space running. There were new toys, a reading area, and a small cafeteria where the children had their meals. Sarah no longer had to carry this burden alone. Lucas grew up happy by his grandmother's side, finally living the childhood that had almost been taken from him. He helped where he could, serving snacks, playing with the younger children, and organizing the books. But what Sarah loved most was seeing him smiling again, free from fear, with no more tears in the quiet of the night. He had hope for the future. One afternoon, while Sarah was organizing some donated clothes, Lucas approached her holding a book in his arms. "Grandma, I've decided what I want to be when I grow up." His eyes shone with determination. Sarah smiled, curious. "And what would that be, my love?" Lucas adjusted his glasses and said firmly, "I want to be a lawyer. I want to help people who go through what you went through. I want to make sure no one else is ever convicted on lies." Sarah felt her heart warm. She ran her hand through her grandson's hair and nodded with pride. "Then you'll be the best lawyer this world has ever seen." While this, on the other side of the city, Robert Carter was walking down a narrow corridor of a small office. After resigning from his position as a judge, he took a new direction. He became a defense attorney for wrongful conviction cases. His former reputation weighed against him, but that did not prevent him from fighting. He owed it to Sarah. He owed it to all the people who had not had their voices heard. Now, as he reviewed yet another case, he felt for the first time that he was on the right path. The sound of metal trays banging against each other echoed through the muffled prison cafeteria. Claire Carter kept her head down, her hands protected by disposable gloves, as she portioned tasteless food onto the plates of the inmates passing through the line. The once powerful and feared former prosecutor was now just another prisoner among many. The orange uniform she wore was a constant reminder of the fate she herself had forged for so many innocent people. The inmates passed by her, some casting looks of contempt, others mocking quietly. Claire had never imagined that one day she would be on that side, that she would taste her own poison. "Hey, prosecutor, enjoying the food you never thought you'd serve?" One of the women laughed as she picked up the tray. Claire ignored her, pursing her lips, keeping firm. She wouldn't show weakness. But inside, rage and humiliation seethed like an open wound. Yet as the days turned into weeks, Claire began to notice something she had never seen before. The women there had stories. They had lives. Some were rightly convicted, but many, like Sarah, were victims of a flawed system, denied a real defense. Now she was trapped inside the very mechanism she once controlled, and there was no escape. While Claire learned to swallow her own arrogance, outside the prison, the cases she helped manipulate were being reviewed. Human rights lawyers were working to reopen old cases, and some convictions began to be overturned. People who had lost years of their lives behind bars were being released, and Claire Carter, who once boasted of being the most feared prosecutor, was now the face of one of the biggest judicial scandals of the decade. Meanwhile, Sarah Miller received a check in her hands, compensation for the time she was unjustly imprisoned. The money wouldn't bring back the lost moments, but it meant something important: acknowledgement. She clutched the paper between her fingers, breathing deeply. It wasn't about money, it was about being heard, about being treated as someone who matters. Lucas looked at his grandmother and smiled. "What are you going to do with all this, Grandma?" Sarah raised her eyes to him and then looked at the children running in the yard. She already knew the answer. "I'm going to help more children, so none of them go through what we went through." And so the woman who was almost forgotten by the system would turn her pain into hope. The sound of firm footsteps echoed through the renovated yard of the community center. Robert Carter walked slowly, observing the environment around him. Sarah Miller's house, once just a simple home, was now an official shelter, filled with life and hope. Children played on the newly installed swings, laughter filled the air, and volunteers helped organize the day's activities. Sarah had turned her pain into a purpose. He stopped in front of the porch, taking a deep breath before knocking on the door. It was the second time he asked that woman for forgiveness, but this one seemed the most difficult. Sarah opened the door with a calm smile, as if she already knew he would come. She held no resentment. Robert hesitated, then lowered his head slightly. "I needed to see with my own eyes what you built. I needed to say again that I'm sorry for everything you went through." Sarah nodded, indicating that he should come in. "I could have spent the rest of my life bitter, but that wouldn't bring anything back. So I did what I knew how to do: care. These children needed a home, a refuge, and I needed to move on." She looked around, seeing the little ones running down the hallway. "This house was just mine. Now it belongs to everyone who needs it." Robert swallowed hard. She was stronger than he could ever imagine. "I let my blindness make me part of a corrupt system, but I'm trying to correct that. I've been reviewing the cases that went through the court while Claire was in power. You weren't the only victim. But I'm striving to ensure you're the last." On the other side of the room, Lucas approached, carrying a stack of books. The boy now had a determined look, different from the fragile child before. He placed the books on the table and smiled at Robert. "I'm studying laws now. I want to understand everything, to one day be a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who protects the innocent." Robert's gaze softened, and he felt something that had long seemed impossible, a glimmer of hope. He swept his eyes over Lucas's determined face, seeing there not just the fragile boy he had once seen suffer in court, but a young man who carried within him a purpose, a genuine desire to change the world. For the first time in a long time, Robert Carter experienced a feeling different from the crushing guilt that had accompanied him since realizing the mistake he had made with Sarah. He nodded slowly, allowing himself a rare smile before resting his hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the firmness of his posture. Lucas was no longer a victim of the system. Now he was someone who would fight against it. The world needs lawyers like that, men and women who understand the importance of justice and who will never allow power to be used to condemn the innocent. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. And when that day comes, when you stand before a court not to be judged but to judge, I will be proud to see that truth and justice have prevailed. Lucas raised his face and smiled, a sincere smile full of hope, and his eyes shone with a conviction that not even all the suffering he had endured could extinguish. I'm going to be that judge, not to punish, but to ensure that no one suffers like my grandmother suffered. His voice was firm, as if he was making a promise not only to Robert but to himself, to Sarah, and to all the people who had been crushed by the unjust system that had once condemned them. Sarah, who followed the scene in silence, felt her eyes well up. She didn't need to say anything, because it was all there in the glow of her grandson's gaze, in Robert's silent humility, in the promise of a future where no one would go through what she went through. Her chest filled with an indescribable emotion, a mixture of gratitude and peace. Finally, the cycle was closing. She sighed, caressing Lucas's face, and murmured with a choked voice, "If anything good came out of all this, it was the path we chose to follow. We are where we should be." Outside, the sun was slowly setting, painting the sky with golden and orange tones, while children's laughter echoed through the backyard of the community center. Life went on, but this time, with hope. Did you like Sarah and Lucas's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. I'll see you there.